The courtroom was cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the mood. Pale gray walls, polished wood furniture, and buzzing fluorescent lights only added to the sterile atmosphere. No one wanted to be there. Not the attorneys, flipping nervously through case files. Not the tired judge seated on the bench. And certainly not the woman in the third row, clutching her daughter like she might float away if she let go. That woman was Rachel Carter, and the little girl in her lap, clinging silently to a stuffed bunny, was Emma, her 3-year-old daughter. Emma's legs dangled limply, her small fingers wrapped around one of the bunny's ears, her face pressed into her mother's shoulder. She hadn't said a word since the night the police showed up at their apartment 3 weeks ago. Now, they were here for a custody hearing, a painfully public attempt to settle something heartbreakingly private. Rachel's ex-Emma's father had filed for partial custody, despite the multiple allegations of domestic abuse that had led Rachel to flee in the first place. Emma had witnessed it all. But since that night, she hadn't spoken. Not a word. The room was nearly silent except for the occasional rustle of legal papers and a judge's gavel striking gently for order. There were no angry outbursts, no dramatic accusations. Just the heavy weight of what everyone wasn't saying. Emma sat motionless, her big brown eyes darting between unfamiliar faces. The stern man in a dark suit who kept looking at her. The soft-spoken woman from Child Services who kept glancing at her notes, and the judge who hadn't once smiled. She didn't understand why she was here, only that her mother was nervous, and that the room made her stomach feel tight. A social worker had warned the court. Emma might not speak. It's not stubbornness, it's trauma. For her, silence is survival. The judge had nodded somberly, already knowing how fragile this situation was. The child's therapist had even submitted a statement saying that bringing Emma to court could re-traumatize her, but her presence might be the key to protecting her. Long-term safety. It was a heartbreaking contradiction. She was too young to testify, but her reactions mattered. Everyone in the courtroom knew this, yet no one truly expected anything from her. She was just there, a ghost of a witness, a symbol of the damage that had already been done. Rachel rocked slightly, whispering comforting words into her daughter's ear that barely made sound. "We'll be okay, baby. I promise. Just stay close. Just stay with me." She wanted to cry, but she couldn't not hear. Not now. She had to be strong. For Emma. When the judge finally looked down at them, her face softened just a little. "Let's take a 10-minute recess," she said. "I believe there's a special arrangement scheduled." Rachel's brow furrowed. She hadn't been told about anything else. She looked at the social worker, who simply nodded toward the courtroom doors. A low murmur spread through the room. Emma's eyes remained locked on her bunny. Then the door opened. At first, no one saw what entered. Just a soft shuffle of paws, a faint jingle of metal tags, and then a golden retriever stepped into the room. His coat gleamed in the light, and he wore a navy blue vest that read K9 Comfort Dog. Working. Please ask to pet. His name was Justice. He didn't bark. He didn't sniff or wag excitedly. He simply walked down the aisle, calmly, like he had done this dozens of times before, because he had. Justice was trained to comfort victims, especially children. He knew how to read body language. He knew fear. He also knew when a child needed a moment of calm more than anything else. Emma didn't move. Her eyes met Justice's, and for the first time in weeks, her expression changed. Her hand loosened from her bunny. Her lips parted just barely, and in that frozen, breathless moment, something began to shift. Emma didn't blink. Her wide, tired eyes stayed fixed on the dog, now sitting quietly in the aisle. Justice didn't look at her directly. Instead, he faced slightly away, ears perked forward, tail motionless. It was intentional. He had been trained not to intimidate or overwhelm, to be present without pressure, to exist beside fear until fear had somewhere safe to go. Emma's tiny fingers still clutched the bunny, but the grip had loosened. Her mother noticed it first. Rachel stiffened not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in weeks, a flicker of hope. Her daughter, who hadn't spoken in 24 days. Her daughter, who had hidden under tables, behind closet doors, and even inside the dryer when she heard loud voices. Her daughter, who had once sung to butterflies and named all the clouds. That same little girl now sat upright, watching this. Silent golden figure, as if it had stepped out of a dream she barely remembered. Justice didn't move. He didn't need to. His very presence was an invitation. The room remained hushed. No one dared speak. The judge had postponed the next proceeding quietly, sensing this wasn't the kind of moment anyone should interrupt. And Emma's mind, so small, so shaken, was busy processing what no adult in the room could understand. To her, Justice wasn't a trained dog or part of any legal team. He wasn't wearing a vest. He wasn't there to help with the case. To her, he was simply safe. And right now, safe was everything. You see, trauma doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask permission. It arrives suddenly, quietly, and lives deep in places words can't always reach. For Emma, it had taken her voice, her sleep, her appetite, and her trust. But trauma, experts say, is not permanent. Sometimes, healing tiptoes in just as silently as pain once did. Rachel leaned forward and whispered, "That's Justice, baby. He's here just for you." Emma blinked. Slowly, then, without warning, she turned in her mother's lap, her bunny falling to the bench. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just slid down, little sneakers hitting the polished wood floor. Rachel instinctively reached to stop her, but the social worker touched her arm gently. Let her go. Justice shifted, sensing motion, but stayed grounded. When Emma stepped forward, it was only a few inches. But to her mother, it felt like miles. She had barely left Rachel's arms since the night they fled the apartment. One step, then another dot. Every footfall was silent, like the courtroom itself was holding its breath. Emma stopped a few feet from Justice. She looked at him, head tilted. Slightly. He remained still, offering her all the space in the world. No judgment. No command. No hurry. Then she reached out. A hesitant, tiny hand hovered above his head, so small compared to him. And after a pause, her fingers gently brushed the fur between his ears. Justice closed his eyes for half a second. A silent acknowledgement. The courtroom walls didn't crumble. No music played. But something in the room shifted. It was like watching a child remember what peace felt like. And then Emma did something no one expected. She knelt beside him. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. And for the first time since that awful night, since flashing lights and screaming and doors slamming, Emma whispered. It was too soft for most people to hear. But the bailiff closest to her leaned in just enough to catch the words. Two small words, barely a breath. He turned to the judge, stunned. She said, "Safe now." The entire room went still. The judge lowered her pen. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. And for a moment, one surreal, unforgettable moment, no one could speak, except the little girl who finally could. Wake up to barista quality coffee with the Brewmaster coffee maker. With a single touch, brew the perfect cup every morning, customized to your taste. Sleek, easy to use, and designed to make every day a little better. Order now to transform your mornings. The words rippled through the room like a wave. Safe now. Simple, soft, but heavy enough to bring grown adults to the edge of tears. No one dared move. Even the scribbling court stenographer stopped mid-sentence. The judge rested her hand on her desk, lips pressed together, her eyes fixed on the scene. Unfolding before her, not as a judge, no, but as a human being. Emma didn't look at anyone. She remained curled beside Justice, her forehead still resting gently against the dog's warm shoulder. Her fingers toyed with the fur on his back, the way a child plays with a beloved blanket. Her body had finally relaxed, no longer clenched. Tight in fear, Justice stayed perfectly still. He knew this moment was delicate. That one wrong movement, one tail wag, one excited shift could shatter the thin wall of trust he built in seconds. He'd been trained for this. Not to perform tricks, but to sense vulnerability. To enter the eye of storms and simply be. That was the gift of a K9 comfort dog. No commands, no expectations, just quiet strength. Rachel's tears finally fell. She didn't wipe them. For weeks, she had watched her daughter drift farther away, lost inside a silence no mother could reach. Therapists had gently explained that Emma's mutism was a coping mechanism, her mind's way of protecting itself from memories too overwhelming to name. They'd said it could take months, years, or never come at all. Yet, here she was on a cold courtroom floor finding her voice again. Because of a dog named Justice. The bailiff stepped back, clearing his throat, blinking away tears he wouldn't admit were there. He looked at the judge, uncertain. No rulebook had prepared him for this. The opposing counsel, the child's father's attorney, shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Whatever argument he had prepared now seemed flimsy. How could anyone stand in front of a child who had just reclaimed her own truth? The child services social worker was already scribbling notes, not just about Emma's words, but about her body language, her emotional readiness. This moment, however small it seemed, could change everything. The judge spoke gently. Let's allow Miss Carter a few more minutes. No rush. Her voice had lost its courtroom edge. It sounded more like a grandmother than a legal authority. No one objected. Justice slowly lay down on the floor beside Emma, adjusting just enough to get comfortable without disturbing her. She shifted too, placing her tiny hand on his chest, feeling his breath move in and out. That steady rhythm, calm and sure, was a language her heart understood more than any words. The photographer assigned to the courtroom silently raised his camera, then stopped. Some moments, he realized, weren't meant to be captured. They were meant to be remembered. Emma's bunny still lay forgotten on the bench, one ear drooping over the edge. Rachel reached for it, held it gently, but she didn't call to her daughter. She knew better. This was Emma's moment. And after so many weeks of fear, silence, and hiding, she wasn't going to take it from her. Outside the courtroom, a few people waited, journalists mostly. They had no idea that history was unfolding behind those closed doors. That a little girl had just changed the narrative, not with accusations or courtroom drama, but with a whisper and a dog. One therapist watching from the gallery leaned in and quietly said to the social worker beside her, "This needs to be documented. This is how healing starts." And so, in that small, solemn room, under oath, under pressure, under the gaze of law and responsibility, one child made it known. She was not invisible. She was not broken. She was not voiceless anymore. She was safe now, thanks to a golden retriever with a badge and a heart trained to listen. Emma hadn't moved in several minutes. She sat there on the courtroom floor, knees tucked under her, her small hand gently rising and falling on Justice's chest with every breath he took. The moment felt sacred, too delicate to disturb, too rare to explain. Around her, time seemed to slow. The judge had leaned back in her chair, eyes watching but not interrupting. Lawyers on both sides had put down their pens, their arguments momentarily silenced by the undeniable truth playing out in front of them. The smallest person in the courtroom had said more in 2 words than they ever could in 2 hours. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched her daughter, so fragile and so strong all at once, begin to heal in real time. The child who had barely let go of her mother's leg since the night they left the apartment was now independently seated next to a creature she had never met before this morning. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a day, but in that moment, something had begun. Justice shifted slightly, moving closer to Emma until his body was curled around her like a warm shield. His golden coat wrapped gently around her legs, and she leaned into it without hesitation. Her hand found his ear and twirled it absent-mindedly. The judge finally broke the silence. "Miss Carter," she said softly, as if raising her voice would shatter glass, "would you like to stay with Justice a bit longer?" Emma didn't speak, but she nodded. It was slow and slight, but clear. It was the first voluntary response she'd given to anyone outside her family since the night they fled. The court reporter, unsure whether nods were recordable, typed something anyway. Everyone knew that moment needed to be remembered. Then the judge looked around the room, particularly at the opposing counsel, the lawyer representing Emma's father. The man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His argument had been prepared, that Emma was too young to express her wishes, that her silence shouldn't be mistaken for trauma, that shared custody would benefit everyone. But now, he couldn't say it. How do you argue with a child's trembling whisper and the way she clung to a golden retriever like he was the only thing that made sense in her world? Justice's handler stood quietly at the back of the room, watching. Officer Donna Morris, a veteran canine officer and trauma responder, had seen dozens of courtrooms, hundreds of children. But she had never seen a moment so pure and so decisive as this one. She watched Emma, amazed at how the dog had managed to break through in mere seconds what therapists and specialists had struggled to touch for weeks. It wasn't magic. It was presence, a heartbeat, an offering of comfort without demand. "This is why we do this," Donna whispered under her breath. And maybe the most remarkable thing of all, Emma didn't look scared anymore. Her eyes, though still solemn, held a spark, not quite joy, not yet, but recognition, of safety, of space, of control. She gently pressed her cheek against Justice's fur and let out the softest sigh. In that breath, she let go of something she had been carrying, a memory, a fear, a weight no 3-year-old should ever know. The judge finally stood. "We'll recess until after lunch," she said. "Let's give Miss Carter some space with Justice." No one objected. As the adults filed out, Emma didn't move. She didn't even seem to notice them leave. She was somewhere else entirely now, a place not built of oak panels or legal codes, but one made of golden fur and the steady rhythm of a dog's breathing. And in that quiet courtroom, now nearly empty except for one small girl and one calm dog, something sacred was happening. Not justice in the legal sense, but justice in the truest one. The phrase echoed long after the room had emptied. Safe now. 2 words, whispered, soft as a sigh. But they rang louder than any gavel, louder than the lawyers, louder than the past itself. Justice remained curled around Emma, his breathing slow and calm. His body, warm and grounded, acted as a barrier between her and the world. Emma didn't know that she had just stunned a courtroom full of adults. She didn't know the court reporter had typed those words into the official record, or that the judge herself had quietly asked for them to be underlined. All she knew was that, for the first time in forever, she didn't feel afraid. Rachel sat a few benches back, watching. She didn't want to rush in and break the spell. Emma was still in that delicate in-between space, where fear and comfort overlap, where silence begins to unravel just a little. And those 2 words? They weren't random. Emma hadn't just mimicked something she'd heard. They came from inside her. A therapist once told Rachel that healing isn't always loud. That sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not with shouting or tears, but with the first word after silence. Or the first look, the first touch, the first laugh that doesn't sound forced. This was one of those moments Emma had spoken for. The first time in 24 days, and it hadn't been to her mom, or her therapist, or the judge. It had been to a dog. A golden retriever with kind eyes and no questions. And maybe that was the secret. Justice didn't ask her to explain anything. He didn't need to know what she'd seen or heard or felt. He didn't ask if she was scared or if she was okay, or what the bad man had done. He just existed beside her. Still, steady, safe. When the courtroom cleared, Officer Dana Morris walked slowly to the bench and sat beside Rachel. She kept her voice low, her eyes on Emma. She said the words, didn't she? Rachel nodded, eyes watery but steady. She did. Dana smiled, the kind of quiet, knowing smile that comes from years of heartbreak and healing. That's more than most kids ever say, even months after. That's her way of telling us everything. Rachel looked at her daughter, still curled beside Justice, like they were old friends. I almost forgot what her voice sounded like, she whispered. They sat in silence for a moment, just watching. Then Dana added softly, "We've worked with dozens of children over the years. Some never speak. Some take months. But when they say something like that, safe now, it's because they believe it. Not because they're told to. Not because they're asked. Because they feel it." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. I don't think she's felt safe since she was old enough to understand what fear was. She does now, Dana said. Gently, at least today. Justice finally looked up, sensing the shift in the room. He didn't stand, just lifted his head slightly and nudged Emma's elbow with his nose. She blinked, then looked at him, eyes clear, face soft. Then she did something that nearly broke Rachel. Emma smiled. It was faint, just a flicker. But it was real. Her first smile in nearly a month. Rachel didn't cry. She couldn't. Her heart was too full. The judge peeked in from the hallway, spotted the scene, and nodded to the bailiff beside her. "We won't rush this," she said. "Tell the attorneys to wait." And as the grown-ups waited in hushed rooms and behind heavy doors, Emma remained exactly where she was, wrapped in golden fur, grounded in soft breath. No longer silent. No longer lost. No longer afraid. She had spoken. She had smiled. And she had declared what everyone needed to hear. She was safe now. The courtroom had never felt like this before. It had seen years of pain-screaming arguments, broken families, desperate parents. But this was different. There was no shouting, no accusations being hurled across the aisle. Just silence, reverent and raw. A kind of silence that only follows truth. And Emma had delivered it. Not with a speech. Not with a lawyer's polished words. Just two fragile syllables whispered into golden fur. Safe now. When the recess ended, the judge returned first. She sat quietly, reviewing the notes, but her mind wasn't on paperwork. It was on the little girl who had spoken without being asked to. A child who had given her verdict long before the court could. Next came the attorneys. They walked in slower this time, less combative, more cautious. The air had changed, and they knew it. The father's legal team looked rattled. Their strategy based on technicalities and parenting plans suddenly felt hollow. How could any of it matter, now that the child had spoken? Emma and Justice were still on the courtroom floor, right where everyone had left them. She was sitting upright now, holding his ear and humming softly. The sound was almost inaudible, but Rachel recognized the tune, a lullaby she used to sing to Emma when she was a baby. She gasped quietly. It wasn't just that Emma had spoken. She was remembering. Remembering. Safety. Connection. Her voice. Justice remained by her side, head resting on his paws. His job wasn't finished, not yet. He would stay as long as she needed him. His presence wasn't about tricks or therapy. It was about showing up, staying calm, and letting broken hearts decide when they were ready to be whole again. The judge leaned forward, her voice soft. "Miss Carter," she said, addressing the child gently. "You're welcome to sit with Justice for as long as you like." Emma nodded. That simple gesture was all the court needed. She had spoken once. She didn't need to say more. The social worker stepped forward next. She had tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor," she said, based on today's observation and Emma's voluntary expression, "I believe we have sufficient emotional insight to move forward with our recommendation." The judge gave a small, thoughtful nod. "I believe so, too." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She had sat in too many rooms with people who doubted her, who saw her as hysterical, unstable, or overly emotional. But now, the most powerful voice in the courtroom wasn't hers. It was her daughter's, and that changed everything. The child psychologist assigned to the case was next to speak. She cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses, her voice shaking. "Just slightly. Your Honor, in all my years of trauma work, I've never seen a child express emotional readiness so clearly in a setting like this. Her words, her interaction with Justice, her posture, it all tells a very specific story. She feels safe with her mother. She does not associate safety with her father. That's not an opinion. That's trauma response in real time." There was no objection, no argument. Even the father's attorney sat still, hands folded, eyes lowered. He knew this case had shifted beneath his feet. He glanced toward his client, who fidgeted uncomfortably, suddenly unable to look at the child who had once called him Daddy. The judge looked around. "In light of today's events," she said gently, "we will proceed to final recommendations. But let the record show today's turning point came not from evidence or testimony, but from a whisper and a golden retriever who reminded us all of what safety truly looks like." Justice wagged his tail once, softly, as if he understood everything. The decision didn't take long. By the time the judge returned from her chambers, the courtroom had settled into a quiet, respectful stillness. Emma had moved from the floor to her mother's lap, cradling her stuffed bunny and leaning gently against Rachel's chest. Justice lay curled beneath their bench, close enough to touch, close enough to protect. He wasn't going anywhere, not until this was finished. Rachel held Emma close, her arms wrapped like armor around her daughter's fragile body. But for the first time in weeks, Emma didn't squirm or pull away. She nestled in, trusting, calm. Her eyes flicked toward Justice every few seconds, almost as if confirming he was still real. Still there. Still hers. The judge took her seat and gave a long, deliberate pause before speaking. "I want to begin," she said, voice composed but warm, "by acknowledging the extraordinary bravery shown in this courtroom today. Not from the attorneys or the experts, but from a child. A 3-year-old girl who, without prompting or pressure, told us everything we needed to know." Rachel's breath hitched. Her grip on Emma tightened. "She told us she feels safe," the judge continued. "And it is the opinion of this court that her safety must be prioritized above all else." There it was. The shift. The turn of the tide. "As such," the judge said, "custody will remain solely with Ms. Rachel Carter. Any future contact between the child and her father shall be subject to therapeutic supervision and subject to the recommendation of licensed professionals." Rachel closed her eyes. Relief poured over her like sunlight after months of darkness. But the judge wasn't finished. "I would also like to formally recognize the contribution made by Justice, the Comfort Canine, and Officer Dana Morris. Without their presence, we may not have seen this breakthrough. The court extends its deepest gratitude. A ripple of soft clapping followed, not the thunderous applause of victory, but the gentle sound of people witnessing something sacred. It wasn't about winning. It was about restoration. Dana stood at the back, chin lifted proudly. Justice didn't react. He simply looked up at Emma one more time, then closed his eyes again. Outside, the world waited. Journalists leaned against the railing, trying to catch any scraps of news. But no one inside the courtroom was thinking about headlines. Not even Rachel, though she knew the story would spread. She could already hear it. Toddler's 2 words change courtroom outcome. But none of those headlines would capture the truth. Not really. They wouldn't explain the sleepless nights, or the way Emma used to scream at the sound of keys rattling in a lock. They wouldn't describe how it felt to see your child disappear inside herself, how desperate you could become, begging for any sign that she was still in there, still reachable. And they certainly wouldn't capture what it meant to hear those 2 words. Safe now. Rachel had waited 24 days to hear her daughter's voice. She would never forget the way it sounded, soft, uncertain, but so full of truth that it shook the very bones of Justice. As court adjourned, Dana walked to the bench with Justice. Emma stood beside her mother, Bunny in one hand, the other resting lightly on Justice's back. The judge leaned over and spoke directly to Emma. "You're very brave," she said, "and very strong." Emma looked up at her. Then, to everyone's amazement, she said something else. "Justice is my friend." A small gasp, a few tears. Rachel's knees nearly buckled. The judge smiled, deeply moved. "Then he's a very lucky friend." And as they exited the courtroom, hand in paw, mother and daughter side by side, the world outside had no idea that justice had just been redefined by a little girl and a golden retriever who asked for nothing and gave everything. Emma never remembered leaving the courtroom that day. She didn't remember the lawyers murmuring behind her, or the soft applause from strangers in the hallway. She didn't see the flashbulbs going off through the glass doors, or hear the reporters speculating wildly about what had happened inside. All she remembered was the feeling of Justice's fur beneath her fingers, warm and golden, and her mother's steady hand holding hers all the way to the car. Rachel, on the other hand, remembered everything. The judge's final words. The way Emma had stood taller after whispering, "Justice is my friend." The look in the therapist's eyes, part wonder, part awe. And most of all, the first moment in what felt like forever, where she truly believed they were going to be okay. It was the end of one chapter and the quiet, cautious start of another. That evening, Emma fell asleep without crying. No night terrors, no screams, no locked closet doors or frantic hiding. She simply curled up under her blanket, Bunny tucked beneath her chin, and whispered, "Safe now." One more time into the dark, almost as if she needed to hear it again to believe it. Rachel stood in the doorway and listened, eyes wet. She believed it too. News of the hearing spread faster than Rachel had ever imagined. She hadn't planned to talk to the press, but the story seemed to travel on its own, picked up by parenting blogs, local news, then national outlets. Toddler speaks 2 words in courtroom. Changes everything. People were captivated by the image. A silent child, a comfort dog, and a moment so pure it cracked the walls of bureaucracy. But what the headlines missed was the ongoing story. Emma still had hard days. Some nights she'd wake up shaking, and other days she wouldn't speak at all. But now there was a difference she had a way back. A memory she could return to when things felt scary. Justice, calm and steady. Her mother, holding her hand. The knowledge that she was heard. Rachel made sure they visited Justice once a week. Officer Dana welcomed them every time. Each visit was the same. Emma would kneel beside him, whisper something in his ear, and press her forehead to his shoulder. It became their ritual. She didn't have to explain what she was saying. Justice always listened. One day, during a school assembly where Dana and Justice had been invited to speak, Emma did something unexpected. When Dana invited any child, wanted to pet Justice to come forward, Emma stood up from the gym floor slowly, but surely, and walked straight to him. She didn't pet him right away. Instead, she turned to the crowd of wide-eyed children, clutching the hem of her dress with trembling fingers. Then she said, "He helped me talk when I was really, really scared." The room went quiet. Teachers looked at each other, stunned. And then the clapping started. It was soft at first, then thunderous. Justice wagged his tail and licked Emma's hand once. Months later, the story would go on to inspire new legislation in several states allowing trained comfort animals to accompany minors in courtrooms. Judges referenced the Carter case when discussing trauma-informed justice. Emma's 2 words were printed on posters in court waiting rooms. Safe NO, because no child should be afraid to speak. But none of that mattered to Emma. She didn't care about news interviews, or policies, or public attention. She just cared that she could sleep through the night again, that she could hum when coloring, that she could say, "I love you," back to her mom without it catching in her throat, that when someone said the word safe, she no longer looked over her shoulder. And she cared, more than anything, that Justice was still her friend. Because sometimes, it only takes 2 words to change everything. 2 words whispered into fur. 2 words that silenced a courtroom, softened hardened hearts, and gave one little girl her future back. Safe now. And this time, everyone believed her.